I never thought I'd end up in this situation. I was just a regular night shift worker at a Wendy's in a small town in Ohio. The kind of place where not much ever happens, just the usual stream of late-night customers, the occasional car crash down the road, and the hum of the ice cream machine that never seemed to stop. But that night was different. It was a little after midnight when the strange events began. The store was mostly empty, just me and a couple of other workers. Mark, the fry cook, and Jennifer, who was handling the drive-thru. Everything felt off. The air was thick, heavy, like something was watching us. I tried to shake it off. It was probably just the exhaustion. Working nights, you get used to feeling strange. But there was something about the silence, the way everything seemed too still for this time of night. It started with a car pulling into the drive-thru, but it wasn't your usual customer. The headlights cut through the dark like a blade. It was a black sedan, a model I didn't recognize, parked too far up from the speaker box, almost like the driver was trying to avoid detection. Mark raised an eyebrow from the kitchen, but he didn't say anything. Jennifer leaned in, pressing the button on the intercom. "Hi, welcome to Wendy's, what can I get for you?" she asked, her voice professional, though I could hear a slight tremor in it. It was odd, but I couldn't put my finger on why. There was a pause. A long, uncomfortable silence before a voice finally came through. "I'll take a double cheeseburger," the voice said, sounding distorted, like it was coming from a long distance away. Jennifer repeated the order, but the voice only replied, "And a Frosty." No more words. Nothing else. Just those two items. I was already feeling a little uneasy, but when I saw Jennifer's face, pale, her eyes wide, I knew something was off. She looked back at me and mouthed, "Something's wrong." But before I could ask, she turned back to the speaker, ready to take the payment. I heard the transaction go through. "That'll be $7.35, please pull forward," Jennifer said in a monotone, her usual chipper voice now gone. The car didn't move. "Jennifer, what's going on?" I whispered, walking up to the drive-thru window. But it was too late. The car's engine revved up suddenly, shaking the window. It was loud, almost violent. And then, silence again. I peered through the blinds and saw something that sent a cold shiver down my spine. There was no one in the car. I'm not talking about the driver being gone for a moment. I mean, the car was completely empty. No one in the front seat, no one in the back. It was as though it had never been occupied. I froze, not sure if I was seeing things. Jennifer didn't notice at first. She was still trying to make sense of the situation. But I could feel my pulse quicken. Mark poked his head out from the kitchen and saw it too. His face went white. "What the hell is going on?" he muttered, as though he could somehow make sense of it if he just said the words out loud. Suddenly, the car started moving again. But this time it backed up, slowly, deliberately. It didn't seem like the driver was in control. The car moved back toward the edge of the parking lot, toward the dark corner where the lights barely reached. I ran to the door, the hairs on the back of my neck standing up. "Stay here," I told Jennifer and Mark. "I'm going out to check." I walked cautiously toward the car, my mind racing. Maybe it was a prank, maybe some kids messing around. But deep down, I knew this wasn't a joke. As I got closer, I noticed something even more disturbing. The car's rear window was completely fogged up, like someone had been inside, breathing heavily. But no one was there. That's when I heard it. A faint whisper from behind me. It sounded like a voice, but not quite a voice. "Leave." I turned around, my heart pounding in my chest. No one was there. Just the empty lot and the oppressive quiet. The voice, it felt like it had come from inside my head. It wasn't loud, but it was unmistakable. I wanted to run, but something rooted me to the spot. Then the car's engine roared again, louder than before, and I knew it was time to get back inside. I turned on my heels and bolted toward the door. But as I reached for the handle, I felt something cold and clammy touch the back of my neck. I whirled around. No one was there. I didn't look back again. I slammed the door behind me, breathing heavily. My mind was spinning with what I had just seen. Jennifer and Mark were staring at me, their eyes wide with confusion and fear. What the hell was that? Mark asked, his voice shaking. He looked at the drive-through window, then back at me, his face pale. Where did the car go? I didn't have an answer. I couldn't explain it, not then. I tried to calm myself, but the feeling in my gut was growing stronger. Something wasn't right. Something was watching us. And it wasn't just the empty car. Maybe it was just some prank, I said, trying to convince myself. People mess with the drive-through all the time, especially late at night. But as I looked out the window toward the dark corner of the lot where the car had disappeared, I saw something that made my stomach churn. Two small, glowing lights in the distance, like eyes. They were too far apart to be a reflection, and too bright to be anything natural. They hovered in the dark, unmoving. Mark, do you see that? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Mark squinted through the window, his face growing more anxious. What the hell is that? Jennifer, who had been silent up until now, grabbed my arm. Her fingers were cold, her grip tight. We need to get out of here, she said, her voice barely audible. Now. Before I could respond, the lights blinked out. Just like that. Gone. I felt a wave of dread wash over me. That was no prank. It was something else. Okay, enough, I said, trying to steady my breath. We're locking up early tonight. Let's just finish up and go. This place gives me the creeps. Mark didn't argue. He went into the back to finish cleaning up, while Jennifer began wiping down the counter. I stood by the front, my eyes glued to the parking lot, waiting for something, anything, to move. And then, just as I was about to walk toward the kitchen, I heard it. A scraping sound, soft but unmistakable, coming from outside the building. It was slow, deliberate. Someone was dragging something heavy across the pavement. I froze. Do you hear that? I asked, looking back at Jennifer. Her face was as white as paper. Yeah, what the hell is that? She whispered, taking a step back. We both slowly moved toward the window. The scraping grew louder, closer. I couldn't help but think it sounded like nails on a chalkboard. It was unbearable. Then, I saw it. A figure emerged from the shadows at the edge of the lot. Tall. Thin. Almost unnaturally so. It was dressed in dark clothing, but its movements were jerky, like it didn't quite belong in our world. The figure dragged something behind it, something heavy, something wrong. The scraping sound stopped abruptly, and the figure stood still, just outside the range of the streetlight. It was looking directly at us. But there was something horribly wrong with its face. I couldn't see details at first, just the outline of its features, sharp angles, eyes too wide, too dark, with an unnatural gleam. The lights flickered. The air felt colder. I could almost feel the figure's gaze on me, drilling into my skull. I backed away from the window, my heart pounding in my chest. Jennifer was already at the register, her fingers trembling as she fumbled with the lock. Mark was still in the back, oblivious to what was happening, but I knew I had to act fast. I was about to run to the back and tell Mark we needed to leave, but that's when I heard the voice again. That same distorted whisper, faint but unmistakable. Leave. It was the same voice I'd heard earlier, only this time, it wasn't in my head. It was outside, coming from the figure in the dark. I couldn't breathe. Mark. Get up here. I screamed, my voice breaking. But there was no answer. That's when the figure moved. Slowly, unnervingly slow, it began to approach the building. I watched in terror as it glided closer, dragging whatever it was behind it. The scrape of metal against pavement grew louder, the sound of it sending chills down my spine. I knew we had to leave. I turned to Jennifer, and we both made a run for the back door. But just as we reached it, the power went out. Complete darkness. The door wouldn't open. I tugged at the handle, desperate, but it wouldn't budge. Then I heard it, a heavy thump, followed by the sound of something dragging across the floor toward us. I whipped around, my pulse racing. I couldn't see anything in the darkness, but I could hear it getting closer. It was in the building with us. I pulled harder on the door, my hands slick with sweat, but it wouldn't open. That scraping sound was growing louder, closer, and I realized, whatever was out there, it was inside now. And it was coming for us. I was panicking. My hands were shaking as I desperately pulled on the back door handle, but it was locked tight. The sound of something dragging across the floor grew louder, like it was moving slowly toward us. Jennifer was beside me, her face pale as a ghost, her breath coming in ragged gasps. "What the hell is that thing?" she whispered, clutching my arm so hard it hurt. I didn't have an answer for her. I was just as terrified as she was. But I knew one thing for sure, whatever that thing was, it wasn't human. The scraping sound stopped. Total silence. The air felt thick, oppressive. My heartbeat was all I could hear, pounding in my ears. And then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw it. A shadow, stretching across the floor. It was impossibly long, far too long for anything human. It crept across the room, bending in unnatural angles as if it was reaching for something. I froze. My mind screamed at me to run, but my body wouldn't move. I watched in horror as the shadow shifted, taking on a form. The figure that had been outside, the one with the glowing eyes, was now inside, its shape distorted in the dim light of the emergency exit sign. It wasn't walking anymore. It was crawling, its body twisting in ways no human body should. Its arms and legs bent backward, snapping with sickening cracks as it inched closer to us. And its eyes, those wide, dark eyes, were fixed on us, like it was savoring the moment. "Run," I whispered to Jennifer, my voice barely a breath. She didn't even hesitate. She turned and bolted for the kitchen, but I couldn't move. My legs felt like lead, my body frozen in place as the creature's gaze held me captive. I could hear it now, the sound of its breath, ragged, wet, almost choking, coming closer. It wasn't just dragging something, it was dragging itself. Suddenly, the power flickered back on, the harsh fluorescent lights buzzing above us. The sudden brightness made the figure in the shadows all the more terrifying. I could see it clearer now. Its skin was pale, sickly, stretched too tight over its bones. The bones that stuck out at unnatural angles, like they were about to pierce through its skin. I could see its mouth too, gaping wide, filled with rows of sharp, jagged teeth, but it didn't make a sound. It didn't need to. I turned and ran for the back kitchen. Jennifer was already halfway through the swinging doors, her body shaking, her eyes wild with fear. I heard a noise behind me, a soft scraping, like nails against tile. The thing was getting closer. I burst through the kitchen doors and grabbed the first thing I could find, a large butcher's knife. My hands were slick with sweat, but I didn't care. I was too terrified to even think. I turned around, ready to defend myself, but the kitchen was empty. Jennifer was gone. Panic set in. Where was she? Where did she go? I could hear her breathing, soft and fast, coming from the far corner of the kitchen. I spun around, knife raised, only to see her huddled behind the walk-in cooler. She was shaking, her eyes wide with terror. "Jennifer!" I hissed, moving toward her. But then I heard it again. That scraping sound. It was coming from the other side of the kitchen. My blood ran cold. The figure was here. I knew I had to move, had to get out of there, but my legs wouldn't cooperate. I stood frozen, listening as the thing moved closer, dragging itself across the floor. I could hear the wet, choking breath getting louder. And then I saw it. It was standing in the doorway. Its face was still twisted, the mouth hanging open, but now it was grinning. It was a horrible grin, stretching too wide, too far for any human to ever smile. Its eyes, those deep black pits, were focused on me. I was paralyzed, trapped in the kitchen. I could feel the cold sweat running down my back as the thing slowly advanced, its movements jerky, like it was playing with me. I didn't know what to do. The knife felt useless in my hands. There was no escape. We were cornered. But then something shifted. The thing stopped, just outside of reach. It tilted its head, like it was studying me. And that's when I saw it, the thing in its hands. It wasn't dragging something. It was holding a body. The body of Mark. He was limp, his eyes wide open in terror, but lifeless. The thing had taken him. I couldn't breathe. Mark was gone. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was that Mark's eyes weren't empty. They were staring right at me. And then, he moved. His fingers twitched. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. My body went numb as I stared at Mark's lifeless form in the creature's grip. His eyes were wide open, but they weren't just staring, they were pleading. Pleading for help, pleading for mercy. I backed up slowly, every step feeling like a lifetime, my hands shaking violently as I gripped the butcher's knife tighter, my knuckles white. Mark's fingers twitched again, a slow, deliberate movement. It was like he was waking up, but it wasn't really him. I could tell by the way his eyes had that hollow, glazed look to them. It was as if whatever was in his body wasn't quite human anymore. The thing holding him, that grotesque creature, gave a low, wheezing laugh, and it sounded like a mix of a cough and a moan, something far from human. It wasn't laughing at a joke. It was laughing at us. It was mocking us. I wanted to scream, to run, but my legs wouldn't move. Everything inside me screamed for me to get out of there, but the terror had me frozen. My eyes couldn't look away from Mark's body. From the way it seemed to move, as if it was becoming something else. Then, Mark's mouth opened, but it wasn't him talking. The voice that came out of his mouth was guttural, distorted, like it was being choked on its own bile. "Leave, before it's too late," Mark's voice croaked out, though his face remained slack, empty. The thing holding him, no, controlling him, stepped forward, dragging Mark with it. It wasn't a graceful movement, it was jerky, like a puppet being manipulated by an invisible hand. And with every step it took, my heart sank lower and lower. I couldn't move. I couldn't even scream. All I could do was watch as the creature, with Mark's body in its grasp, slowly advanced toward me, its eyes gleaming in the fluorescent light, hungry. But suddenly, I heard it. A loud crash from the front of the store. "Help! Someone, please!" Jennifer's voice screamed from the front. That was all it took. My body reacted without thinking. I turned on my heel, sprinting toward the front, the sound of the creature's sickeningly slow footsteps behind me, closer with every second. I burst through the swinging kitchen doors, adrenaline flooding my veins as I ran toward the front. I saw Jennifer, huddled near the window by the drive-thru, her face covered in tears, her eyes wide with terror. The lights flickered again. But then I saw it. The front door was wide open. The creature, or whatever it was, had been waiting for me to make my move. It was standing in the doorway, silhouetted by the outside streetlights. And in its hand, it held something, or someone. It was Jennifer. She wasn't screaming. She wasn't even moving. She was limp in its grasp, her head hanging at an odd angle. The creature was holding her, but there was no mistaking it, her body had that same dead-eyed, hollow look that Mark's did. Her lips were barely moving, but when she spoke, it was in a voice that wasn't hers. "You should have left," Jennifer's voice rasped, unnatural, chilling, almost robotic. "Now you'll join us." The creature dragged her toward the door, slowly, as if it was savoring the moment. I couldn't breathe. My heart was beating so loudly I thought I might pass out. But as they neared the door, I saw something that gave me a glimmer of hope. The figure stopped. It didn't go outside. It hesitated, looking down at Jennifer's still body, then back at me, its head tilting slightly like it was considering something. It was then that I realized, this thing wasn't done. It didn't just want us to die. It wanted us to suffer. To become part of it. Jennifer's body jerked suddenly, her hands twitching as if waking up from a nightmare. But it wasn't her coming back. It was the thing inside her, still manipulating her like a puppet. I knew then, with a sickening certainty, that we had to leave. No matter what. I grabbed the first thing I could, a broomstick from behind the counter, and swung it wildly at the creature. It wasn't much, but it was enough to push it back a few steps. The thing hissed in pain, but it didn't stop. It didn't even flinch. "Get out of the way!" I shouted to Jennifer, but it was useless. The creature wasn't just using her body as a shield, it was controlling her like a puppet, a marionette. Then, something happened. As I backed up toward the exit, the creature stopped. Its head tilted at a sharp angle, and its mouth opened wide. I thought it was going to lunge at me, but instead, it let out a shrill, bone-chilling scream that filled the entire room. The sound was so high-pitched, I thought my eardrums might burst. And then, just like that, it was gone. The creature, Mark's body, Jennifer's body, all of it disappeared into the shadows. I was left alone in the store, gasping for air, my heart racing. The room was silent. Still. Like nothing had happened at all. Except I knew better. I knew I had just witnessed something that no one would ever believe. I knew I wasn't alone. And I knew, it was coming back. I couldn't bring myself to move. My body was still shaking, my mind struggling to process everything that had just happened. The creature was gone. The bodies were gone. And yet, the silence, it felt wrong. It was as though the world around me had become an empty shell. I stood frozen for what felt like hours, the quiet pressing down on me like a weight. I wanted to run. I wanted to get out of that cursed Wendy's and never look back. But I couldn't. I couldn't leave them behind. Mark. Jennifer. They weren't themselves anymore. They weren't dead, but they weren't alive either. Whatever that thing had done to them, it had twisted their bodies into something unrecognizable. The pain of seeing them, hearing their voices from their lifeless bodies, still echoed in my head. I took a deep breath and grabbed my phone from my pocket, trying to call for help. But the signal was gone. The phone buzzed with a weak, empty message, "No service." I cursed under my breath. Nothing was going right. I had to get out. I had to find some way to get away from this place, from whatever that thing was. But then, I heard it. A soft tap, like someone lightly knocking on the door. I froze again, every muscle in my body locking up. It wasn't the sound of a normal knock. It was slow. Deliberate. The kind of knock you would hear if someone was testing the door, seeing if it was locked. I knew I couldn't go check. I couldn't go near that door. Whatever was out there, I didn't want to face it. But it knocked again. It wasn't the creature this time. At least, I didn't think it was. The sound was too familiar, too human. Almost desperate. I hesitated, but then the door rattled. The knocking grew louder, more frantic. It was coming from the front door. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't stay here, not with the memories of what had happened, but I couldn't leave either. What if it was one of them? What if Mark or Jennifer had come back? I slowly moved to the window, trying to peek out without being seen. What I saw made my blood run cold. There, standing in the dim light just outside the door, was a figure. It wasn't Mark. It wasn't Jennifer. It was someone I didn't recognize. A man, dressed in a torn jacket and jeans, his face pale and streaked with dirt. His eyes were wide, frantic, like he had been through hell. He was staring at the door, his mouth moving, though no words came out. He raised his hand, pressing it against the glass. I could see the desperation in his eyes, but something in my gut told me that he wasn't what he appeared to be. I didn't know who he was, but I wasn't going to open the door. I stepped back from the window, my heart racing. I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck standing up, the sense of being watched creeping back into my bones. That thing, the creature, whatever it was, wasn't gone. It was still here. And it was playing some sick game with me. I slowly backed toward the kitchen again, my hands trembling as I held the knife in front of me. My breath was shallow, the weight of the silence in the restaurant pressing down on me. Every second felt like an eternity. And then the man outside spoke. His voice was soft at first, but as the seconds passed, it became louder, more insistent. "Let me in, please. They're coming. You don't want to be out here with them. Let me in. Let me in." His voice was full of panic, but it was also wrong. There was something off about it. The pleading, the desperation, it sounded too rehearsed, too practiced. I knew I couldn't open the door. I had to get out of here, but I couldn't let him in. Not with that voice, not with the feeling in my gut telling me that opening that door would mean something far worse than whatever I had already gone through. And then, just like before, everything stopped. The knocking ceased. The man outside stopped talking. It was as if he had just disappeared. I felt my breath catch in my throat. Was it gone? Was it waiting outside? I dared to look out the window again, but this time, there was nothing. The figure had vanished, leaving nothing but the empty street and the darkness beyond. The quiet returned, but it was the worst kind of silence, the kind where you can't tell if you're safe, or if the next thing you hear will be your last. I turned away from the window and took a step toward the back. I had to leave. I couldn't stay in this cursed place any longer. But then I heard it again. A sound coming from the back of the restaurant. A scraping. Slow. Methodical. And then a voice, faint but unmistakable. "Leave," it was the same voice. The voice that had spoken to me earlier. It wasn't just in my head anymore. It was real. And this time, it wasn't alone. I wasn't alone. My blood ran cold as the voice echoed through the empty kitchen. "Leave." It was soft, almost like a whisper, but it sent a shockwave of panic through my entire body. I knew I couldn't stay here any longer. Whatever had happened in this place, whatever that thing was, it wasn't finished. And neither were we. The scraping sound grew louder. It was coming from behind the storage room, deep in the bowels of the restaurant. I hesitated for a moment, the weight of my options hanging in the air like a death sentence. If I stayed, I'd likely never leave. But if I ran, where could I go? I glanced out the window again. The streetlights were flickering, the night too quiet, too still. There was nothing and no one out there, and yet I felt like I was being watched. Whatever it was, I knew it was closer than I thought. The scraping stopped. Silence. Then I heard a thud. Followed by another. And another. And suddenly, I realized, the sound wasn't coming from behind me anymore. It was coming from the hallway leading to the back door, the very exit I had hoped would be my escape. I turned around, my breath coming in short, sharp gasps, and I saw it. It was no longer just a thing. It was a man, or at least, it looked like one. His body was bent at odd angles, his limbs stretched unnaturally, his hands outstretched as though reaching for something, or someone. But it wasn't the man who made my heart stop. It was the eyes. Those dark, deep eyes that seemed to draw everything into them. The kind of eyes that told you something was alive in the body, but it wasn't human. Not anymore. It smiled. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. And then it spoke. "You should have left when you had the chance," it said, its voice low and guttural, like it was made of gravel and broken glass. "Now you're one of us." I turned and bolted for the back door without thinking. I heard the scraping noise again, closer now, as if it was right behind me, but I didn't dare look back. My mind raced with thoughts of escape, of freedom, but my feet were heavy, my limbs slow. As I reached the back door, I yanked on the handle. It wouldn't open. My pulse surged in my throat, panic crashing over me. I had to get out. I had to leave. The door wouldn't budge. I turned and looked over my shoulder. The figure was moving slowly, inexorably, dragging its twisted body closer, inch by inch. The door, the only way out, was locked. And the only thing left was the thing behind me. I didn't even think about it. I didn't care anymore. I ran toward the emergency exit, the only other way out of the building. I pushed open the door, not caring if the alarm went off. I ran into the alley behind the Wendy's, gasping for air, my legs aching with every step. But the nightmare didn't stop. The scrape of something dragging on the concrete followed me. And that's when I heard it again, the voice. "Leave, or you'll be next." I glanced back. The alley was empty. The only sound was my pounding heartbeat and the harsh, shallow breaths escaping my lungs. The figure was gone. For now. I kept running. I didn't stop until I reached my car, throwing open the door and slamming it shut behind me. I could hear the screech of something in the distance, but I didn't dare look back. I drove all the way home without stopping, the darkness pressing in on me the entire way. My hands were shaking as I gripped the steering wheel, my mind unable to process what I'd just gone through. Was it real? Was I losing my mind? I didn't care. All that mattered was that I was out. I was alive. Or so I thought. When I pulled into my driveway, I noticed something strange. The streetlight seemed dimmer than usual, flickering in the distance. The air felt colder. And as I got out of my car, something caught my eye. There, at the edge of the yard, was a shadow. A figure, standing in the dark. Its eyes glowed faintly in the distance. And I knew. It was waiting for me. The creature, the thing that had followed me, had never left. It had been watching me the entire time. It was coming. And this time, I wouldn't escape.